slide that you see up there. Can everybody see that background slide with the
Yeah.
three?
Yes.
So just kind of some way of introduction. My name is Lauren Garduno. I'm the president and CEO of the Ports to Plains Alliance, and I'm also representing our future Interstate 27 in Texas and in New Mexico. The Also on this call today we have Jennifer, and I'm going to let Jennifer introduce herself. She's representing the I-69 group, and Don. We're going to let Don introduce himself at this moment in time. So, Jennifer.
Yep. Thank you, Lauren. Hello to everybody there. As Lauren said, I'm Jennifer Shepard. I serve as the executive director of the I-69 Alliance in Texas, but we have had the good fortune of coordinating with our counterparts in other states along the eight-state I-69 future interstate corridor. And I see a number of those folks on the line today, so thank you all for being here. I think we're all interested in finding ways and opportunities in this next highway bill to have some federal funds dedicated to the development of future interstates. So thank you all for being here.
You're welcome.
Hi there, I'm Don Rodman, and I'm the administrator for the I-14 Coalition. For some of you who may not know about I-14, we got a section that exists in Central Texas since 2017, and the congressionally designated corridor runs east and west from Midland, Odessa, across Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and to Augusta, Georgia. This particular corridor has a particular purpose in serving ultimately as an alternative to I-10 and I-20. And additionally, we've included several congressionally designated north-south connectors, which would go to the coast along the Gulf at Gulfport and at Beaumont and generally at Corpus Christi, although the connector doesn't go that far. But anyway, I'm glad to have everybody here.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Don. So the reason the three of the groups are kind of coming to you all today in this presentation was we have approximately about 14 months, Lord willing, until we have the reauthorization of the Surface Transportation Bill. It's supposed to schedule to lapse in, so I think, September of 2026. Already there are groups and professionals and DOT professionals that are actually working right now to see kind of what that new bill might look like. This is, of course, is replacing the current bill that is referred to as the IIJA. You may have heard of that before. And usually it's a bill that gets reauthorized for about 7 years, 6 or 7 year reauthorizations. Sometimes it's been shorter, sometimes it's been longer, but for the most part, it is the federal bill that takes your federal gas tax money, of course, and redistributes it back to the state through the DOT for certain programs. And so we are wanted to visit with you all today. We have, we think, 11 states represented on this call. I'm going to show you a map here in a minute that basically says that if there's anybody, I'm going to need some people to mute their call for me. If you would, do me a favor and everybody mute their call, mute their call, and then we can use the chat or whatever if we need to talk. But in the end, we have an opportunity over the next 14 months to possibly have some influence on what that new highway bill looks like. And we want to kind of pitch some ideas to you all today and not only get your input, but also maybe see if there might be some willingness to get some commitment to help us band together as we work through this reauthorization over the next 14 months. But what we are proposing, of course, is we are proposing a multi-state future interstate highway program that we want to urge Congress to include in the reauthorization bill that's due coming, like I said, in 2026. Why are we proposing this? Because first of all, when you look at this map, you'll see that as it exists today, there are 23 states that actually have a future interstate corridor that spans multi-state jurisdiction. And that's kind of what we wanted to approach at first. And particularly because we are trying to look at the next generation of interstates that actually serve several needs that we have as a country, and that is movement of freight and goods, trade, economic development, some of those kinds of things. And so that's kind of where our focus has been on these multi-state interstate corridors. And some of the background behind this is that the last interstate highway program was completed in 1992. If you look at a map at a lot of those interstate highways today, most of them were east-west highways, because back in the days, back from 1960 to 1992, as the United States was developing and growing and population was spreading, of course, it was all about trying to get from the East Coast to the West Coast. And that is why you see a predominance of interstate highways that run east and west versus north-south. I want to make an emphasis here that when the Eisenhower bill was signed in the 50s, and then later, when the LBJ bill was signed in the late 60s. Somebody do me a favor, please, and please mute your phone for me. Thank you. So when the bill was first issued in the 50s, and then later the add-on was in the 60s, it was a 95% federal guarantee on that funding. This was particularly important because if you ask and leave it up to states to try to come up with a funding program to build out their interstate corridor, if we start looking at states like Montana and Wyoming and Utah, and especially these western states that didn't really have the population or the generation of tax, it would have been impossible for them to have an interstate highway run through their state. And so that is an important thing. In 1992, after the interstate was completed, there was a federal highway bill in 91. I believe it was ICE-T, 1991. If you look at that bill again and review it, you'll see that it was a creation of the next generation of what they call the interstates. They were referred to as high priority corridors. And you may have heard of that term before, high priority corridors. If you look at a map today of the high priority corridors, most of those are trying to fill the gap that existed by the interstate system, not meeting a lot of the north-south routes. If you take a look at that map today on the high priority corridors, there's a lot of north-south, and so that obviously the highway officials and professionals saw that there was going to be a need for us to try to build more major corridors north and south across this country. But of course that's why they proposed to do it, was that way. Also, at the same time in the 90s, if you recall, something called the North American Free Trade Agreement was signed. Now, all of a sudden, we're looking at the Canadian, U.S., and Mexico connection for the purpose of trade. And so those things were not in place prior to the 90s when the interstate system was being built, but they have been in place today. Every reauthorization bill since 1991 has not adequately addressed the need for the next generation of interstate system. Yeah, basically, and I won't bore you with time with these details, but if you go through and look at every reauthorization bill, ICE-T, T21, just you name it, the way they address future interstates was we're going to create high priority corridors. We may put some emphasis upon some rural corridors. We may let the DOTs fund programs that might on freight corridors. In fact, every state DOT has to have a freight program today. But there has not been any focus on what would the next generation of interstates need to look like. And those interstates that were created, the future interstates out of the high priority corridor group back in the 90s, if you look at it today, in the last 30 plus years, not a single one of them has actually been completed. And the reason why is, of course, goes back to the point that with no dedicated source of funding, you're leaving it up to the DOTs to prioritize these corridors. Again, they've got to weigh they have to weigh their decisions on where they have to put their money, and a lot of times these rural or these future corridors lose out in that decision. Today, there's no dedicated funding source to construct future interstate highways, and so for that and for us, this is kind of why we're getting to the crux of this presentation today. We think that there is a need for a renewed federal commitment to expanding and modernizing the interstate system. We hear people talking about it. We need to upgrade. We need to make it better. Our existing system's getting old. It's getting dated. It's starting to fall apart. And we've got a lot of new technologies that we'd like to introduce into our interstate systems. And we don't have that opportunity today because of the lack of a dedicated funding source. There was a report, just for your information, in 2019 that the Transportation Research Board, there was a report submitted to that committee that said we really need to renew our efforts on the interstate highway system. So it's being talked about, it's being bannered around, it's being thought about, but there's just not been the political will or in really the grassroots will to kind of start pushing this interstate forward. And so that's part of why we're here today, to kind of introduce this to you all, to kind of start kind of getting our heads around it. Why does this matter? Well, we know that, you can, an interstate system, you start looking at the movement of goods up and through the United States, and you start looking at the way trucking moves across the United States today. It's kind of the path of least resistance. It's the easier resistance. The interstate systems draw that trade. Not only do they draw it, but they help move that trade more effectively. And right now, as we all know, our trading partners with Canada and Mexico, regardless of the debate right now about tariffs and what's going on as we speak, is not going to change the fact that Mexico is still our top trading partner, and we still do a major amount of work. In fact, as you all know, or may know, or may not know, Laredo is the number one port in the United States today, and that's out of every port in the United States. So this is continuing to grow, and the interstate system would support that and continue to support that as we move forward. However, we also know that you hear people talk about, do you live on an interstate? Because we may decide to move in a business on an interstate system, and a lot of times you hear that that play out with businesses today that are where they're choosing to locate, and they say, well, we're choosing this location because of its access to interstate systems. You hear that all the time, and you continue to hear that all the time, and so it drives economic growth, and especially for us. Some of these interstates that we're talking about today are running through some of the rural parts of the United States of America, and we are talking about trying to get that economic growth also in some of those more underserved rural parts of America. But on top of that, it matters because a two-lane highway is okay, but two-lane with shoulders is better. Four-lane divided is better than two-lane with shoulders, but an interstate with controlled access is even better and more safe than a two-lane highway today. And so it's always about trying to improve safety and adding resiliency to our existing system. The debate may not be on today, but when the Mississippi River was getting low about a couple of years ago, and they were not able to move as much freight up and down the Mississippi River, companies look for alternate routes. Ag producers look for alternate routes. When the railroad doesn't, goes on strike, now the, ag producers look for alternate routes. Oil and gas, movers, they look for alternate routes. So having a more robust interstate system that's running north and south, even in addition to the east-west corridors, allows us to add some resiliency to our outdated modern interstate today. And then finally, why it matters. The interstate system was created in the 50s by a president who was a general at the time, went over, when he fought over in Europe, he understood this, saw this. He saw that there was a strategic need to have a better highway system across the United States of America. And so that Interstate Highway Act of 56 was also a military defense act. It was a military highway act also known as that. And so there's a whole network of highways today that run across the U.S. called StrayNet. And they are supported in the national defense. And of course, an interstate system is part of that network. And there's upgraded standards for that reason, to be able to incorporate the deployment of our military forces wherever we need to deploy them. And then finally, this is an important point I think we need to understand. It doesn't matter what the politics of environment is. We still need to build an environmentally conscious transportation system. And we can take advantage of new technologies that are in place today as we upgrade these interstate highways. That when you move freight faster, you're reducing pollution. When you're taking advantage of new technologies, you can help reduce pollution. And when you look at new types of modes of travel, you can reduce pollution. And so those are the benefits of the new interstate system is you get to incorporate the new technologies that actually have a positive impact upon our environment without being too unreasonably radical in our environmental standards. So that's an important point that I think we need to make sure gets driven home today. So what are we proposing? This is the mechanism that we're going to be working on over the next 14 months. We are going to be working with communities and with cities and governments and coalitions and grassroots campaigns all over these 23 states if we can to start to get people's head around the value of having a future Interstate Highway Act signed in this reauthorization bill in 2026. The way this funding, the mechanism, and how this would work, because your DOTs are going to be asking this question. Is this going to be money that is going to I have to dedicate to this highway program that's taken away from my other needs like bridges and preventative maintenance or maintenance of my system or safety and things like that? The answer to that question is no. We are asking for a future highway funding program that's in addition to those things, and you can see here by these points of what we're talking about. A dedicated funding source that's going to be dedicated to building out unconstructed, multi-state authorized interstate miles in each state that has a future interstate highway. We want it to be dedicated funding. And what I mean by that is that this money is coming back to the DOTs, and we're asking them that they put it on these corridors. They don't water it down and distribute it to other corridors in the state. Yes, those have needs too, but we want this funding source to focus on these future interstate corridors. And then finally, we want to make sure that the funding that we are able to secure through this bill actually is added to. It doesn't take away from each state's highway trust fund rate of return calculation, because that is today a big deal too, also with the state DOTs about how much of their gas tax is coming back to their states on their rate of return. And we want to kind of keep that whole, keep that separate, and not take that away. Why? Well, in part because we're talking about a multi-state corridors that actually is going to serve the need of multiple states. And there are multiple states that value from having these corridors run across these state boundaries and so forth. And then what we also want with this program is that we want a multi-state program that actually is formula funded, that provides flexibility to the states to determine their annual development, their annual needs for corridor development. And what are we saying there is that we don't want to dictate to the DOTs that you have to use this, yes, on this corridor, but we want to be able to prioritize where up and down their corridors they need to spend this money, depending upon their need. I'll give you an example. In Texas, for example, on I-27, we have a committee that's in place today that actually has made determinations on priorities about how we're going to build out this corridor and future interstate. And we want to make sure that not only is that voice recognized, but also that that direction that the DOT takes and uses continues to be how they plan and build out their interstate corridor. It may be different for other states. But we want to give the state the flexibility to putting the money where it's most needed at that particular point in time. We do want to guarantee a federal commitment to completing this interstate. When Eisenhower signed that bill in '56, I think it was $15 billion is what they funded at the time. When it was finally completed in 1992, it was 135 or 133 billion. So you went from 15 billion to 133 billion in that time frame. But that inflation was basically the federal government saying, yeah, we're committed to building these interstates. And they were able to inflate that dollar, and they did inflate that dollar to make that happen. We need to be realistic in that in our ask also, but we think that there needs to be some guarantee for a federal commitment to completing these interstates. And then finally, this is an important point I think that y'all need to understand is that AASHTO, which represents that is all 50 DOTs. They are represented with under the American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials, and they have come out with their policy recommendations on the reauthorization. And we have reviewed that, and we'll continue to review that and make sure that everything that we're asking for on this future interstate highway program is it harmonizes with the AASHTO policies and what they want to do. So, bottom line is that when you start having your conversations with your DOT, you can bring that point up. Is that we're asking for a bill here and a funding bill here that actually is in harmony with what the DOTs actually wanting to do with their policy on reauthorization. And so what is the challenge today? What we're asking from everybody today, of course, is that we are an open invitation for everybody to get involved in this with us on this 14-month journey. We're asking for communities, chambers, counties, MPOs, cities, other transportation coalitions across the country to be united for a dedicated funding mechanism to complete these corridors. I'm calling it something big. Some people call it a moonshot. You can call it whatever you want, but we think that the time is now. The time is ripe. We think that the stars are aligned properly. We think the politics are the right place they need to be for us to have a serious conversation about building an interstate system. And we think that we're going to need all the help that we can get at the grassroots level, talking these things up, passing these resolutions, so that we might be able to join our voice together. History lesson on that: in the 50s, when the Interstate Highway Bill was first signed, you go back and read that history. It was the big emphasis was the Chamber of Commerce's, the economic development groups, the cities, some of the big cities, and what this interstate would look like. Counties. I mean, it was just all hands on deck back in the 50s that was actually making their voice heard in those committees in Washington D.C. at the time, that allowed for to leverage the political will that we needed to sign on to that bill. And so we're looking for a similar model even today. What's our action call? Well, we are in this presentation. You're going to see we have some links and we have some handouts for some resolutions that we like for our local and state levels resolutions that we like for you to consider maybe getting passed and getting committed to. We are also asking for you to engage your congressional members, capitalize on that August recess anytime that they're at home back in the district or whatever. Make sure that this topic is in front of them. If we're talking about, for example, the I-11 corridor in Arizona and Nevada, we want talking to your representatives on that. The I-69, the I-14, the I-27. It doesn't matter what your interstate is, multi-state interstate is. We want you engaging your congressional leadership on the value of this future interstate funding program. And then we are asking that you also have an open dialogue with your DOT. And I would argue, or I would pitch to you that comment about AASHTO, harmonize with AASHTO, is an important point to make as you engage your DOTs about possible future funding for their corridors today. What we're going to do over the course of the next 14 months is that we would like to continue to do some periodic updates, possibly like in this format, with Zoom meetings about every 2 months. And then we also are going to have some calls to action and with messages and testimony. There may be times when we may be asked to be on the Capitol Hill to testify. There may be times back in our local states that we'll be asked to bring this message forward and have some conversations as this reauthorization process takes place. And then, of course, we are also going to make available to you all presentation materials that you can use at the local level. And then not only that, but we will make ourselves available. When I say ourselves, I will make myself available. If that's, I can't speak for Jennifer and Dawn, but I will make myself available to try to help you further your efforts in trying to get this message out to everybody. And I will pause there. I'm not looking at the chat, Joe, so I don't know if there's any questions anybody may have at this time.
I'm not seeing any questions pop up yet, but I just put in there at the top of the chat, there's the links for the presentation, the handout, another handout, and a draft resolution, and who to send the executed resolutions to.
Okay.
And Jerry Schweibel just raised his hand.
Hello, Jerry. Good morning. Good afternoon. Yeah.
Afternoon, everybody. Excellent presentation, Lauren, and thank you for bringing us all together. All very valid points. Good. Gosh, it's bad when you start talking about what was going on in the 50s and 60s, 70s, and 80s and 90s, and we start remembering some of us were there. So those things don't change. I do have a couple of recommendations, and I think I think we've got some opportunities in regards to enhancing your strategy. One, I will mention that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has a transportation infrastructure logistics committee that's been very active, and they're involved in the National Freight Mobility Plan and a lot of these things that are going on throughout the country, including what we do in Texas. I think that's one area that I would encourage to work, because that's the largest lobbying group. If we get that committee to really buy into what we're talking about today, I think that would be very helpful to us, number one. Number two, even within the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, we have another opportunity that Ross Perot Jr. is the new chairman of the board of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. So now we have a Texan, and who better than someone like Ross Perot Jr., who has been heavily involved in all of the transportation planning in North Texas, and looking at private-public partnerships and how that works. Get him and his team as an opportunity. I think it also one other point. I think one of the things that I think that we in Texas have not done a good job of, in my personal opinion, I mean, some of you may have a difference of opinion, is that we don't do a good job of bringing key players in the legislative side or in the administration side. You got Secretary Duffy, and you got to bring the secretaries, not create forums or assistant secretaries involved, and include even the committee members of transportation on the House side or on the Senate side. I think we have to target strategically to those individuals, especially those of us that may be involved in the advocacy or in the fundraising or in the political arena of supporting some of those candidates, to bring them down here to our neck of the woods in Texas, where the connectivity really, explodes and it becomes more critical. So I want to, whether it's Secretary Duffy or it's Chairman Graves in the House side or on the Senate transportation side, like it used to be John Thune, now he's the leader. So I mean, you've got other folks there. I think if we target during this 14 months them by creating forums, or if there are forums within the cities where we have our corridors through, all we can do is ask. You never know. They may show up and they may participate. But the messaging has got to be, consistent from all of us in all of the communities that are involved in this initiative. So I commend you for that. And I just throw those out as ideas. And I'm sure some other things that I may dream over a glass of whiskey tonight. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Jerry. Appreciate those comments. Yeah. So one historical reference, and then the other one, your first point, just kind of jogging memory for me, was back the U.S. Chambers of Commerce was very influential in the way that first interstate program came out. And so that's a very good point, and I think we'll follow up with that. And we'll follow up with the Ross Perot chairmanship also. The other thing, just for everybody's edification benefit also, is we agree with you on the engaging Secretary Duffy and some of these key transportation officials. Part of our strategy will be, and part of it will be, hopefully, is that we continue to create the materials in a way that actually we all are speaking with the same voice when it comes time to, whether you're in Tennessee talking to your representative, or you're in Arizona talking to your representative, or you're in Missouri talking to your representative, you're in Texas talking to your representative, or even Louisiana. It doesn't matter. Another key point that strategy that we're going to incorporate too is every state of those 23 states that have a corridor in it, we're identifying leadership, congressional leadership in those states. And we are going to attempt to take advantage of that opportunity too. as we do this. For some of the people on this call, I know some of my board is on this call. I also represent the Heartland and the Theodore, and we are not at a future interstate discussion yet, but we do have another initiative that we're doing with those states in terms of maybe getting a feasibility study and maybe a future interstate designation. But even those states, by making them aware of this funding program that we're trying to do for interstate funding, is important. And so therefore you have like Thune in South Dakota. You have some of those people that are going to be, they're going to be important people to get to also, because of the potential of what this funding could do for some of those states in the future if they do decide that they have a future interstate that they want to bring on board. So those are going to be some of the strategies that we are going to be working on over the course of the next year. Anybody else have a hand up? They would like to say something.
Lauren, this is Jennifer, and I'm just going to be bold and not raise my hand, but I did want to add a few points. And I'm reading over these comments, and several folks have talked about, pulling back of rail funding in California and looking for sources of funding for this. And going back to Lauren's comments about twofold, the time is right with the reauthorization bill, and we are in lockstep with AASHTO. That is because the state DOTs are coming on strong saying, instead of pushing billions of dollars through competitive grants, they want to see formulas. And we do expect, with changing of administration, changing of majority, to see priorities shift. And I know you all have heard as well as I have that Secretary Duffy last week began talking about the administration's priorities, and they are ready to build. And so I think all of that tees up very nicely in support of what we're trying to do. We want to formularize it so that it's very predictable. There's not an application process, a negotiation of long grant contracts. So that I think is in our favor, that we are in lockstep with AASHTO. And those grants that we see them redirecting, those funds are frankly the source of funding that we would anticipate. So we're not looking to necessarily grow the total pot of transportation funding, but as Congress redirects that funding, it goes into, in part, this formularized future interstate program. Last point I'll make is we did reach out. We've been, working with preliminarily the authorizing committees on both the House and Senate. And so through several of our coalitions, we were able to get this request already submitted to both the T&I committee and the EPW committee as they began their work on the authorization process. So I say we're on the playing board, but we certainly have a long chess game to play between now and when we would hope to see a bill by next September, September of 26, to get this over the line.
Thank you, Jennifer. Yeah, she was talking that first point she brought up. So everybody understands the IIJA that we're currently under today was a $1.2 trillion bill. Only 351 billion of it was for highway. The rest of that was for other stuff. And a lot of that rail in California, for example, the EV program, everything. It was all other stuff. And so what we're seeing in this current administration is that pullback of that other stuff. But what we're thinking for is what we're going after is we think we can go after some of that money and they didn't spend all that. Just so you understand, they didn't spend all that 1.2 trillion. Because a lot, like Jennifer said, a lot of it was being passed out by grants and competitive grant programs. And if you go back and look at that, Texas, for example, we didn't do very well. And it was just the politics of the time. So that's why we're focusing. Go ahead and fund this interstate out of some of that gap we're calling, but make it formula driven and push it back to the states to do that. And so that's a very good point. And I appreciate you bringing that out, Jennifer, in that way. So. Anybody else have any questions? So,
yeah, Lauren, sorry, this is Rick over at Tom Green. Judge Floyd, I think, had a couple of comments right quick, if you don't mind.
You bet.
Well, and thank y'all for allowing me to kind of throw it in here. Don't forget the power of the general populace, because Texas, what was it, Don, 6 years ago? The state houses and Washington's reluctance to deal with the gas tax or add to it or, being known to raise taxes. But Texas committed to putting it before the voters, and both propositions passed by 80%. So I think we need to make sure that we don't forget that that seems like with the general public, improvements in the transportation system seems to be pretty popular.
Yeah, that's a great point, Judge. I appreciate you bringing that out. And just so everybody understands, a little history. Ports to Plains, our corridor was not an interstate at one point. It was through the power of the state legislation and the passing of it that way that got it into a future interstate, model. And so I mean, and this may be a different thing for different states, but I do know for Texas and for New Mexico, for example, that Prop 1 and Prop 7 that you're referring to put a lot of oil and gas money, for example, into the highway program. And so the state and local level, and you're going to see that what we're asking out of this group today too is that a lot of it's grassroots level work. We're asking for cities and counties, to kind of get engaged at their levels also, so that you can bring this importance of this issue to the front. And so appreciate that. Appreciate you bringing that out. That slide I've got in front of you, when we're done today, there's going to be a link to this presentation, and hopefully it will, and if you have any questions about what I talked about and need more details, I'd be glad to visit with you offline about that at any time. You have my phone number to do that. We also have a link to a handout. This is what this handout is it's a one-pager front and back that kind of is laying out the why. So it's a talking point paper that you can give to anybody. You can give to your councils, you can give to your commissioner's court, you can give to your employees of your bank, Jerry. You can give to anybody, just any handouts, our mayors, anybody to kind of talk to them about what we're going to be working on, and also give them to your state and federal congressional delegations, and to make them aware of this is what we're working on. And then, of course, we're going to have a link to some resolutions that we're going to be asking for local communities and counties to consider passing in your order of business, so that we can actually kind of and that those links, those resolutions, when they're signed and passed, I think we have in there they come back to Joe Kiley, our VP of operations for the Ports to Plains, and he will gather all those up, and we'll use them, of course, as leverage when it comes time to talk to them at the federal level. Now, miss anything, Joe?
No, sir.
Okay. Any other questions?
Just be sure if you want to download I'll leave this up just for a little bit. You have time to go to the chat and upload the documents.
So one last request I'll make out of this group, because like I said, I think we've got 11 states that are represented here today. We are still trying to gather up the coalitions from all 23 of these states where we have future interstates. For example, I believe there's a future interstate corridor that goes out of Oklahoma over into Arkansas, or maybe Missouri. And so, it's like a two-state future interstate, but I believe that if you can get the Oklahoma DOT to value this presentation, because all of a sudden they may have an opportunity to spend some money to complete their little two-state interstate that they have between Tulsa over into Arkansas area, I think. So if you're not on this call today, we need to, if you know of anybody that you've worked with in the past that is working on these kinds of things, then please get that information to us so that we can reach out to them personally. I had a very fortunate meeting with the head of the Arizona DOT last week in Montana at their Washto meeting, and turns out she and I had worked on some research 30 years ago together, and she put me in touch with the I-11 Coalition, which is out in Nevada and Arizona. So that's how we got to gather these groups up, because we need all 23 states engaged, so we can leverage that when it comes time. And with that, that's my presentation today. Thank you all for listening in, and appreciate your time, and appreciate you taking time with that. So, Joe, we're going to leave that there, I guess, for a little while in case they need it.
We will also send an email out after this. I think we have not yet captured complete contact information for everybody. So we generally know states, but it would be helpful to know city and specifically what corridor. You know, we could do the sleuth work to figure that out, but we'll send out an email with the links to all of this material in case you haven't captured it thus far, and then ask for that information back just so we can begin to gather our contacts list. I will also say that as you are making contacts, particularly with congressional members during the August recess and or your DOTs, if they raise questions, if you will circle those back to us, you'll have our contact information, all of us for the 3 corridors, you know, initiating this today, so that we can, you know, respond to questions, but be consistent in our messaging as we go forward to build out the case for this program.
And to add that to that, I just made me think of something. You know, I think what we'll do with those contact lists, if you are okay with this, is you know we won't wait 2 months to give you information. As things come up, as things move through, as we move through this process over the next 14 months, if something big happens, you know that we want to report about, we will probably do some blast email information to everybody to kind of keep everybody up to date about what's moving. Or also, in case something comes up that we may need your participation on, you know, if a federal committee is meeting, for example, the T&I committee is meeting, and all of a sudden we need some advocacy, we need some comments. There may be some blast communications with this group to see if we can, you know, gather up some people to help us go do some testimonies and stuff like that. So we're gonna use this contact list that way, if y'all are okay with that, and to try to keep everybody up to speed and abreast of what we're trying to accomplish. So thank you all for your time today. I know it's valuable, and I appreciate you choosing to share it with us. And so we'll give the rest of it back to you.
Thank you, Lauren. Appreciate you.
You bet. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lauren,
Yes.
Cal, can you give me a call when you get a chance on the governor's meeting?
Yes, I'm good to go. I'll see you then.
All right. We might want to talk a little bit about what we're going to cover on that sometime.
Yeah, you bet.
Yeah. All right.
So for those of you on this call that are in the north, you know, the funding is a big deal. We got to keep the funding going with everybody. That conversation needs to be in the front of their mind. But and I didn't mention this today in this presentation, but you know, Eisenhower signed an Interstate Highway Act in '56. I-27 was not on that list. But LBJ came back later in '68 and signed, you know, Interstate Highway Act, and he added 27 to the list. So, I mean, that story, I'm telling you guys, this story up north, because if if we get a feasibility study passed up north, and it shows that it's very feasible to have a future interstate running up all through the Dakotas and Nebraska and everything, then all of a sudden we turn around and say, okay, now we can submit for a future interstate designation, and then we can turn around on this highway bill that I'm feeling 100% sure we're going to get passed, right? And you make it eligible for that future funding in the future. So that's going to be part of our strategy with our northern states. And Cal, I'll talk some more with you about that as we get ready for that meeting.
Yep. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Makes sense?
This is Don.
Yeah.
You know, on 14, we went through a 2-step process where in the 15 bill, we got the Texas part done. We were unable to get the other states in the corral. And then we came back in 21 and got everybody else.
Yeah, and so we have a similar model, Don. You know, we went after all of our corridor and ports to plains. That included Oklahoma and Colorado, and we weren't successful at that, but we did get, you know, New Mexico and Texas. And so getting the feasibility study from Oklahoma to Montana, we think if we get that accomplished, then we can show the economic generation of the powerhouse of this corridor, these other 2 high priority corridors up north. Then all of a sudden we turn around and we can reintroduce that conversation. So I think it's very doable. It's very, very doable conversation. So, all right.
Thanks, everybody, for your participation.
Thank you all.
See ya.
Thank you.